don't believe it can be attributed to my client. In and of itself, I don't have a problem with it. It's
Okay.
when they try to link it. So I guess that's my answer.
Okay. And, you know, I think that just as I put parameters on the last item that we took up yesterday evening, I think the same parameters are on this one, unless you can establish that Mr. Stillwell is there when they return and hears this, then this would go only to Mr. Copeland's knowledge.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
When you say, did you mean, Your Honor, Mr. Zachary's knowledge? Or I didn't quite understand.
Mr. Zachary and Mr. Copeland. I mean,
Okay.
they're both present for it, but the point being not Mr. Stillwell.
Okay.
So yes.
Your Honor, number 23 is also on the same topic.
Okay.
And so Mr. Shard had objected to hearsay about who shot up Mr. Bennett's mother's home. This portion, the question that Detective Dennis, from listening to the time hack, said, what kind of gun do you think Shannon had on him? And then Zachary says, I don't know. They had an AK and another 223. It was two
Okay.
223s and an AK. There's not much more other than kind of the portions we have discussed.
Uh-huh.
It's not like Mr. Zachary goes into much additional detail about that night at the home of Big Boo when Mr. Copeland and then leave and come back and here's the phone call. My reading of it, or listening to Detective Dennis and Zachary's conversation, is Zachary stating, he's saying this by my listening and reading, that he's like, they had an AK and two 223s. He's saying, because he's not in the car, he doesn't know, because he makes a comment shortly thereafter where he's like, I don't know how many guns they had in the car. But to me,
When they got in the car, yeah.
yes, Your Honor.
So yes, to me as well, that sounds like at the point in time when they all leave out, which seems to include Mr. Stillwell, here's what they had on them in the way of guns.
And Your Honor, here's my concern,
Yeah.
and it's, I get that this session, this interview, the police are just trying to get Mr. Zachary to dump knowledge or dump information on them and just get as much information as possible. I get that. Obviously, the detective's job is a little different than an attorney's job. I don't know, as I sit here right now, what Mr. Zachary is basing any of this on. Does he know, for instance, is he saying he saw my client go into a car holding a 223? Or is he saying, well, I just know Shannon to carry a 223? See, and those are the type of things, if I was prepping a witness, I would clarify. I think we need to clarify exactly what he means, because if he just knows my client to carry a 223, if that's what he's saying, then that is something very different than seeing my client get into a car with Woody with a 223.
Agreed. So on page 113, lines 11 and 12, there's some unintelligible. Do we know what that
I don't
actually said, or can we listen to that? Because that may shed some light on it.
I believe my review of this, it was unintelligible to me. I don't know if it, other people may find it intelligible.
Okay.
I don't have anything written there.
Well, maybe if we just listen to this part of it.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, we will pull up that video to play it.
Okay.
It may take.
Sure. So we can move on and come back when it's queued up.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So the next item is on page 122.
And Your Honor, this portion is regarding, they're asking Zachary about what Birdman knew about the shooting of the Little Wayne tour bus, and they also asked him questions about the murder of Donovan Thomas. And so this kind of falls in the category of the state. If we discuss this topic or ask Mr. Zachary questions while he's on the stand, we would lay out an either meet foundation or not meet foundation for, how does he know Birdman? Has he been around him? Like the foundation for this, because it's not clear from just this interview how he's forming this opinion about Birdman's beliefs on or feelings towards these events. And so this is one that I still think it's fruitful to do what we're doing and going ahead of time, but some of it is contingent on Mr. Zachary's on the stand questions.
Your Honor, for instance, just to let you know what the unintelligible is, on 122 line 12, Mr. Zachary says, nah, Birdman, they asked, did he order that murder? Talking about Birdman, Mr. Brian Williams. Nah, Birdman, like he mad at, when he thought Thug had something to do with the tour bus, he mad at him. Like, I don't know how Mr. Zachary can convey Mr. Williams, not Jeffrey Williams, Brian Williams' thoughts about, well, not even knowledge, just speculation, what his feelings are about an event that neither of them were present for. That just strikes me as a whole lot of speculation on Zachary is speculating about what Brian Williams is speculating about. And I just can't see a world where that would be coming in.
Okay, well, I think that Mr. Adkins is essentially conceding that unless the state is able to establish a foundation for how Zachary can testify to what Birdman is feeling, that they wouldn't be able to use this. Right?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay.
Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
The state of Georgia had Mr. Brian Williams on their short list. They did not call him. Same with Rich Homie Kwan or Mr. Lamar. I specifically asked the very first witness in the case. He testified several times. I can't remember his name. Belknap. Belknap. He's with City of Atlanta Police Department. Whether he is alleging that Mr. Brian Williams was part of any type of conspiracy, any type of gang. And he said, no, it's entertainment for show. He has no information. He was not making that claim. So it's total hearsay. There's no co-conspirator link. This would be just, I heard him say something or I didn't hear him say something. So I would object on that basis.
Okay.
Besides, reading someone's mind and what your court said.
Okay, well,
I'd like to cross-examine Mr. Brian Williams.
What he's saying is, no, I don't think he had anything to do with it anyway, but.
Your Honor, if I thought Detective Belknap had discussed some of that Mr. Birdman was a blood, but we're not saying this is a co-conspirator statement for one, and who the state calls or doesn't call is irrelevant to the evidentiary considerations for today.
Sure.
Is the state's position.
I mean, I agree.
I disagree because being a blood, quote unquote, I'm not saying that the gentleman is, I'm not trying to tarnish him or maybe say something accurately, but that's come out in this trial. That's not illegal.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed. I just think as to this issue, if and when it potentially arises at trial, we take it up then. But at this point, the state understands that they don't have a foundation to be able to use this.
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. 123.
Your Honor, we addressed part of this yesterday in terms of Detective Gaither asked, do you think that Thug ordered that against Nutt, talking about the murder? And Zachary says, nah, they're just trying to get a name. This had came up yesterday. It kind of falls in a similar category where the state would have to lay more foundation for how Zachary knows that their motive, knows someone's motive. Is it because they told him? Is it because he interacts with them daily? So we would not just ask Mr. Zachary cold, why did they do X, Y, Z? There would have to be adequate questions for that foundation.
All right.
Well, we would object to an order now to eliminate the first word of no. I don't believe that Jeffrey Williams ordered that. If you're saying it's a co-conspirator and he would know about it, then that is relevant. I don't want it axed from the questioning.
I'm not sure if I follow you.
Okay, so I think that the answer by Mr. Zachary, the direct question is, do you have any evidence that Mr. Williams, Jeffrey Williams, knew about or ordered the killing? The answer is no.
Right.
Then he goes on, and that part, I agree, should come out. But the no, or the nah, N-A-H, I assume, should not be struck if you're striking things.
Okay, well, I'm not striking or not striking this right now. All of it could only come in if there's some sort of an inconsistency and they're presenting it as, you know, to impeach or something like that. So with,
in Your Honor,
I mean, I guess there are two separate, do you think that Thug ordered the murder? And the answer to that. And then
the next part,
the people that he thinks did do it and why.
Understood. And I just don't, the first part to be part of the equation of that potentially is not going to be put.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, they would be two separate items.
Yes, Your Honor. And the way I could potentially see some of this coming out is if Mr. Zachary was asked questions about, because in this interview, he describes, and I mean, he tells Detective Dennis YSL is a gang, and he talks about who he interacts with. And so if we asked him questions about, you know, how does that work, people making a name for themselves or going up in rank, some of these could become relevant if he says, I don't know what you're talking about, things like that.
The same ruling that I made with regard to there are a couple of other comments. Yes, you would be able to use that part of it. They're just trying to make a name to show, okay, yeah, this is how it works. And you have told us this before.
Correct, Your Honor.
Yeah. So there's, yeah, that's kind of separate as well. And you could use it for that. And then there's, if you are using it to show, what he knew or didn't know about who ordered it, then you need a foundation for his knowledge of that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. That clear for everybody?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Your Honor, could I just add one, a 24B to my list? And
Yeah,
it doesn't
sure.
even show up.
Okay.
It doesn't show up in the transcript, but I think it affects Mr. Williams, frankly. Off the transcript where, well, you see it, but the transcript's not accurate. On 123 line 12, the woman who's Investigator Gaither is asking about the rank of who's the leader, and she's suggesting that Mr. Jeffrey Williams may be the leader of YSL, and Quindarius says, who said Thug's the higher up, essentially. I think that's a pretty accurate quote. In Investigator Gaither, and it shows up at the end where after it says unintelligible, she's actually interrupted by Quindarius.
Okay.
And she says, that's just what I heard. I do believe that it would be improper to play Investigator Gaither basically an out-of-court statement suggesting that she's heard from other people that Mr. Jeffrey Williams is the higher up of YSL. It's confrontation clause and hearsay.
So, Your Honor, Detective Gaither she's testified previously in this trial, but this portion, when she says, who said Thug is higher, Detective Dennis is like, who's the boss, who runs YSL? Zachary says, he was not right there when they started YSL. And they're like, who started it? And he says, my brother and Slug, who is Trontavious Stevens, also known as Tick. And so the state's not going to ask Zachary, did Detective Gaither tell you that she believes Thug was higher? That is not a question that the state would ask. But however, this portion could become relevant in terms of he's acknowledging YSL is a gang. When she says, when she says, isn't Thug the highest, or however she phrases it, he's like, who said Thug was higher, which acknowledges there's a gang with some kind of hierarchy, or because he would have been like, what do you mean, higher over what? You know, so
Okay.
So the state, if Mr. Shart's objection is to Detective Gaither's, words saying, I heard Thug was higher, the state does not intend to be asking Zachary about Detective Gaither's opinion on Defendant Williams or the YSL gang. But this portions of it in relation to Zachary saying who he believes started YSL and his own brother, that kind of stuff, he has adequate foundation. We'd have to ask him on the stand to explain that. That's kind of the state's.
And I don't have a problem with anything that Mr. Atkins just said. All I'm saying is, and they could ask about that, and quite honestly, I think the defense likes Mr. Zachary's answers. All we're objecting to is if it's played, there's a prior inconsistent played to the part that Investigator Gaither says, that's just what I heard, referencing that Mr. Williams is the leader.
Okay, so you're saying if for whatever reason it does end up getting played, strike that's just what I heard part.
Correct.
Any problem with that?
No, I agree with Mr. Shart on that.
All right.
Or the state does.
Sounds good.
Your Honor, the next one, to make it easier on everyone. So I think there was a bond hearing or something that Detective Dennis or Gaither, they're referencing a court hearing and arguments that Mr. Zachary's attorney made. They were like, those are good arguments. We all know that. Anyways, the state is not going to be asking. We're conceding this in regards to it's a really brief back and forth where they're laughing about a court hearing, about the argument on bond, about the gang. And so the state's not going to be asking Mr. Zachary anything related to number 26.
Okay. So redacted by agreement.
Your Honor, and also on number 27,
Yes.
there is and he says that earlier. And so when Detective Thorpe, who's the lead detective on Donovan Thomas murder, comes into the room, there's some greetings, and then Detective Gaither kind of tells Mr. Zachary, Thorpe's been working really hard on the case. We've been talking to a lot of people. We appreciate your honesty. The state's not going to I don't think this will come up, so the state's conceding this portion in terms of, I'm not going to be asking Mr. Zachary about if Detective Dennis and Gaither thought he was truthful or doing a good job.
Okay. Thank you. Was that all that one needed to cover?
Correct. It's just them bolstering,
All right.
basically,
Yeah.
on the tape.
Okay. All right. 135.
So, Your Honor, this one, Mr. Zachary says, I think Nard was driving them, and then Thorpe just kind of repeats, okay, Nard was driving. This is when they're speaking about, because Zachary at the beginning of this interview talks to Detective Gaither and Dennis some about Donovan Thomas's murder, and then they get Detective Thorpe to come over because he's the lead homicide detective. And so he goes into more detail at that part. So the state, this part of the interview, Mr. Zachary, as like all of his interviews, he's not saying directly where this is coming from, but the state's position, kind of similar to yesterday, is that the primary source of Mr. Zachary's knowledge is from when he says Defendant Stillwell, Defendant Kendricks told him that night. He also has a brief mention when he goes down to Miami with them that he had some kind of conversation with with Demise McMullen, Nard. And so he does say, I think Nard was driving them. The state's position, and again, this may depend on the foundation of the questions he's asked, but the pool of information that the state's aware of from Zachary's statements is other co-conspirators telling him about either their own involvement in the murder.
Okay.
And Your Honor, my stance, as previously stated, is that if Mr. Zachary is claiming the source is anyone other than my client, Mr. Stillwell, I would object. However, if the source, I understand the court's prior rulings, and if the source falls under the court's prior rulings, I understand what your ruling is.
Okay.
But as I sit here now, I have no idea what his source is with some of these statements that he's making.
Okay, well, I think we have to take the entirety of the statement into consideration, but that would fall under my prior rulings with regard to the co-conspirator exception, so that'll be permitted.
Your Honor, I believe next is number 29, which is 136, line 18 to 137, line 11.
Okay.
In this portion, Detective Thorpe says, after the shooting, do you know what happened to the cars and the guns? And Zachary says, yeah, they dropped it off at O.G. Bentley's spot, who's Mr. Treadwell. And he asked them, do you know if the guns are still around? Did they get rid of them? And Zachary says, most likely got rid of them. He's supposed to have gotten rid of them. And then they have a conversation about, Detective Gaither's like, how do they usually get rid of guns? And Zachary's like, well, this is the first time. Usually we keep the guns. And
Okay.
Detective Thorpe asked if anyone got a word to shoot nut, which is one we kind of just addressed. And he says they just wanted a name. So it's speculation and hearsay. I think the speculation objection is coming from where he says, do you know if the guns are around? He's like, they most likely got rid of them. The state's position here is that, again, his source of them going to Kevin Treadwell's house is, again, the same co-conspirator statements. And he is not definitively at the house or see them bury the guns in the backyard or throw them in a river. But I think it's reasonable to think that from his conversations with them that they went there to get the car and the guns so that they couldn't be caught. So the speculation is Zachary's not physically present at Mr. I have no information that he physically saw these guns being hidden. But I think because he spoke with co-conspirators about it, it is not as speculative as that question
Right.
seems.
He has a basis for knowing from his other co-conspirators that they were dropped off.
Yes, Your Honor.
What happened to them after that? That is what he's speculating. He knows the purpose was to get rid of them, but whether they were actually gotten rid of past O.G. Bentley's place, he doesn't know.
Correct, Your Honor.
But that they were dropped off, he does know.
Correct. And because he kind of answers like it's clear that he doesn't exactly know if this particular portion through impeachment came in, it's, he's kind of telling like, I don't know exactly, I think they did, but it makes sense in the context of the conversation he has a couple hours after the murder.
Right.
That
All
they
right. Well,
wouldn't, so.
with those parameters.
And it just goes, I've stated my objection. I understand the court's ruling. However, I do believe that 9 and 11, lines 9 and 11 on 137 are a little different because, again, that is just, from my understanding, just pure speculation about motive.
And this is kind of similar, Your Honor, in terms of the state would have to ask him foundation about how does he know they wanted a name?
Sure. All right.
Okay, on this one, Your Honor.
Hang on just a second. I need to actually figure out where we are because so that actually, even though 130.
I wrote it.
So that went past what is notated on your number.
It was supposed to say 136.18 to 137,
Okay.
line 11.
All right. I looked down and I'm like, well, we're talking about 137. Okay. All right. Now I'm back with y'all. Okay. 138.
So number 30 on my list. This transcript is really rough here, so I'm just gonna, if the court allows me, just
Sure.
on 138 line 6. Mr. Zachary is talking about Shannon. So Shannon's the topic.
Okay.
Gaither says, right. Zachary says, like, Thug really wasn't messing with him. He was around Thug as Woody's friend.
Okay.
Okay. So still talking about Shannon. Line 13, right. So once he did that, it was kind of like, we can trust him. Zachary says, yeah. And then line 17, she says, we know he a shooter.
Okay.
That's my objection. The law enforcement saying, we know Shannon's a shooter.
Okay.
And so, Your Honor, this portion, which I agree with what Mr. Shard's saying, that this time hack states. And so they're talking about, it starts with Zachary has a comment where he's like, usually Woody and Moonchunk are doing all the shooting. And then Gaither's like, well, did Mr. Copeland slow down with his BS? And he says, when he's around a lot of folks, he gets pumped up. And they're kind of asking, how did Shannon Finney Stillwell get into the picture? And so he's like, well, he was friends with Copeland, comes around, and Zachary says, no one really knew Mr. Stillwell that well. And then, the way that what they're talking about is after the murder of Donovan Thomas, Gaither's like, well, once he did that, and that is the murder of Donovan Thomas, that we could trust him, know he's a shooter. And Zachary's response is, he started messing with Shannon hard. I take the he being Defendant Williams. And so the state feels that Detective Gaither's question to get Zachary's response, if the right questions are asked on the stand, could be relevant because, for one, Zachary on some level confirms what she's saying, because he's like, after she says, they can trust him, they know he's a shooter, Zachary says he started messing with Shannon hard, kind of confirming that, yeah, he started messing with him or hanging out with him or being closer with him because he was a shooter in the context of what Zachary's saying happened on January 10th, 2015. So the state feels that it's not just Gaither in a vacuum saying, we know Shannon's a shooter. I'm not going to ask Zachary what's Detective Gaither's opinion. But yes, my apologies, Madam Court Reporter. But it could become relevant because of asking Zachary in the context of his relationship with Mr. Copeland, how Defendant Stillwell came into the picture, that this exact clip, if the right questions are asked, could become relevant to get Mr. Zachary's response.
Okay.
But if this clip is played, line 13 says, right. So once he did that, it was kind of like, we can trust him. And Zachary says, yeah. And then we could easily go to line 19. He started messing with Shannon and then they go into Woody becoming a new Slug and Shannon becoming a new Woody. But none of that requires line 17, law enforcement saying, we know he's a shooter. That's my objection, specifically that line. I understand. Right.
So up above on line 6, what gets said then? They already knew Shannon liked something.
I just have it say that until. Like that until. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what they're kind of interrupting each other.
Yeah.
My note, Your Honor, is Zachary says, nah, so lines like 2 or 3, Detective Gaither says, did Woody slow down with his BS? And Zachary says, nah, when he's seen that there's a lot of folks around Woody, they pumped him back up. No one knew Shannon like that until Thug, not really messing with him. He was around Thug because he's Woody's friend.
I agree.
Yeah, that's on the prior page, right?
That's 138, line 10. Right, Mr. Atkins? That's where you're at?
I believe so. The transcript lines I'm looking at, I went back through and added, from listening to it. So my line and page is a little off, but.
Well, I see did Woody slow down with all his BS once Nut got killed? Or was he still?
Right. That was on 137.
Right.
And then
this is the he'd get pumped back up, or what?
Yes, Your Honor. It's Zachary says, nah, when he's seen that there's a lot of folks around Woody, then he pumps back up. And then he says no one knew Shannon like that until Thug, not really messing with him. He was around Thug because he was Woody's friend.
And then Gaither says, right. So once he did that it was kind of like, we can trust him. Quindarius Zachary says, yeah. And then Gaither says, we know he's a shooter, or we know he a shooter.
Right.
And I don't know why the Gaither would be allowed to make a declaratory statement, whether she's talking generally that law enforcement has determined that he's a shooter,
right, or
if he's the shooter in this case,
right,
that's a question for the jury.
Right. But, I mean, assuming that he started messing with him hard after that is actually in response to the statement, we know he's a shooter. Well, and maybe I just need to listen to this part.
I view it more of a response to line 13, where she says, so once he did that, it was kind of like, we can trust him, and he's like, yeah. And then you could easily go, he started messing with Shannon he started messing with Shannon. He repeats himself. I don't know why. And then they don't really, there's no real meat to what Zachary says, because then they move on to Woody. But my concern is specifically with, we know he a shooter.
I understand. I'm going to listen to it. It may not elucidate anything, but where is this timestamp?
So, Your Honor, I have a little bit before this is at 3:25:44.
Okay, I'll just start there. And you did send this video, or no? I can't remember.
I will double check, Your Honor.
Okay, just make sure y'all do so that I can listen to it.
That's right. We did give a thumb drive, so it should be.
Oh, so it was on the same thumb drive that the other one was. Okay, I know there were like 4 items on there.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll listen. Y'all can remind me to circle back on it. Do we have that other thing queued up?
Yes, no, and I wanted to make certain that I got the exact time because I just pulled it over to this time frame when you want to listen to this.
Yeah, we're going over.
And I mean, maybe we can just listen to them both while it's up. I don't know.
Keith, forward it to Garrett.
Your Honor, for the record purposes, we're pulling up. We're going to start at 3:08:50.
All right, and this is, we're going back to item number which?
We are going back to this. Actually kind of tackles a couple items because this is all about who shot Lucci's mother's home. But I believe what prompted us to go back was
item number 23. Was that the one we were?
Yes, Your Honor. I think it was 23.
Yeah.
Because we weren't sure if Zachary physically saw these guns or.
Right. Okay. Right. And I've been told that if I plug a headphone into the computer, if I'm on Zoom, maybe I can hear it better. I don't know if that's true. I have to get on Zoom first. Are you playing it through Zoom or are you playing it off your computer? All right, let me then join Zoom. And figure out where this might plug in.
Your Honor, before we play, so 3:08:50 is when they first start. Literally, Detective Dennis asked him who shot up Lucci's mother's home. And then I'm happy to start there for the court if the court would like. There's about 3 minutes of conversation, but when he specifically starts talking about what kind of gun did Shannon have on it, which is more tethered to number 23, I can jump just to that part. I want to just ask the court if you wanted me to play a little bit before or go right to when he's discussing the part about who had what firearms.
If you think the context will help, that's fine.
Okay. We'll start at 308.50, Your Honor.
All right.
Officially 308.41.
So, let's get to this. Who shot up Lucci Mama?
Shut up, Lucci Mama. I'm telling y'all, y'all work with me.
We got bro. Like you're doing great.
Rudy, Shannon, and Lil Pokey.
From Boulevard?
Nah, those are nephew. The Pokey's in jail right now. Quentin Pittman. So, how did, cause that was the gun that you had, that you got caught with. No, that's one gun. So, how did Woody end up with that gun that day? We was at Boot Mama house, big Boot Mama house. And we was like, hey, fucking shit, that's right. Okay. Then when they came back, they ain't tell us what they did. What kind of car were they? They were in what? It was in that white Charger. Woody Chargers? Okay. And then the boy, Mushu, who he did Lucci. Mushu? Yeah. He called Boo. Like, when Woody got back, he called Boo. Like, Boo, we got in. Boo, like, what? Like, somebody just shot up Lucci Mama house, and Mama got shot. Boo, like, don't tell me how they did that. Cause they come back and they say that. Don't tell me how they did that. Then that when Woody got scared again. Cause Mushu, I got 10,000 when Woody did that.
Who had the Monto gun?
Woody. So they actually came back and said they did it, or y'all just assumed it? No, they said they did it. He finally said it when Woody, like I told you, Woody got scared when they said he got 10,000. Like, man, we just shot up Lucci Mama house. So because Lucci was close with Nut, they just... Lucci was hanging with Kel. Right. I told you all about Lucci and Kel. Like, Nut didn't go get killed. I don't know what made him do that. Did you know Nut? Yeah. He give me $20 and stuff. You know, I put him on, get some gas money, phone bills, doing stuff like that.
So he's like a big homie.
Yeah, he cool with the whole city. I don't tell that's what everybody said.
So everybody speaks highly of him. But he still was a street nigga. So he had dirt on his head too.
Yeah, he was trying to, but he, like, every time I see him, so I feel like I'm gas in the car, so he give me $20 for it.
So they look at you like the little like,
yeah. I ain't no harm.
Basically. So, what gun did Shannon, you think Shannon had on that?
I don't know, they had a AK and another 223. It was 223 and an AK. I know they had that big AK. That was poking on.
The AK was?
Yeah.
And what Shannon had?
They had one of the 223.
Oh, he had an AK.
I don't know how they got in the car. I didn't know guns. They go by the house.
So answer this question. So, when we were in court and you found out that gun.
All right. I mean, it sounds like, to me, like he's saying essentially this is what they had with them when they left out.
That's the state's, we're in agreement, Your Honor.
So I'm going to permit that.
Overrule the objection and permit it?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so can we move to the other one that I was going to listen to? That we know he a shooter.
Yes, Your Honor.
That pretty easy.
Yes, Your Honor, it is.
Okay.
So we're going to 325.44 for the record.
All right.
3/25/29.
You know her last name? No. You know where she rented from? So, after the shooting, do you know what happened to the car and the guns? Yeah, they dropped off at OG Finish car. Do you know the guns still around or they got rid of them? More likely they got rid of them. I think when they dropped them off at Finish spot, he pulled that got rid of them. How do they normally get rid of guns? I don't know. That ain't the first time they usually keep them. Yeah. Okay. So, did anybody get word to shooting up, or this was just an opportunity? They didn't want the name. They just wanted the name. Cause it used to be one and more to going out soon. They didn't want the name. So did Woody slow down with all his bullshit, or once Nuck got killed, did Woody slow down with his stuff, or was he still? Nah, when he seen that he had a lot of folk that ran with him, then he popped back up. Moody. Yeah. But see, they nobody really know Shannon like that until then you do. Right. Like those weren't really messing with him. He was running for with Woody from him. Right. So once he did that, it was kind of like we can trust and we know he's shooting. He started mixing with Shannon for it. He started mixing with Shannon.
So he put Woody to the side and Shannon back to the Woody spot.
Yeah. So like Woody took Slug's spot. So Shannon and
It is really, I don't know that it can be determined that he started messing hard with him is in response to him being a shooter, to him doing that, to him coming around with Woody and it being okay because he's Woody's friend. I mean, I just think that I don't think you can base that Thug started messing hard with Shannon on him having been a shooter. I'm going to exclude that.
Understood, Your Honor.
Okay. So moving to 144. Give me just a second. All right.
Your Honor, with this next one, I'm in agreement, and this is probably this section where Zachary is stating that his older brother used to hang out with defendant Stillwell, and then Zachary says something along the lines of, until Shannon got locked up.
Okay.
The state would omit or ensure that the jury never hears about Shannon getting locked up, but may ask him about him knowing his brother.
Okay. That takes care of that objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you.
Now this next one, Your Honor, 32, I'm pretty certain she's not referring to Shannon. I think she's referring to Terry Rivers.
Okay.
Who, I don't know if his name has come up in this. He's certainly not in this case. He's certainly not indicted. My understanding is he's alleged to be associated with some of these gentlemen in some way, but then Gaither adds Yeah, I know Terry Rivers used to steal ATM machines, and I just think that that's just
Okay.
throwing another.
Your Honor, the state agrees and concedes this.
All right.
This
If
portion
y'all are
of it.
going to agree, tell me before we
Yes, Your
listen
Honor.
to the argument. We can save Mr. Short and my voices.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
There is some agreement with this next number 33.
Okay.
So they're talking about the Dexter Montgomery shooting, which was in Act 36. We've already introduced at trial. Mr. Zachary was not present. He admits in this interview he doesn't have any personal knowledge
Right.
about it. The part of this that the state may get into is the photographs used in that case. For example, there's gas station surveillance stills.
Okay.
He recognizes, for example, Demise McMullen, who was one of the defendants in that case.
Okay.
The same photographs that Detective Gaither and Dennis are showing him during this portion are already in evidence. And so depending on, there may be some questions with those exhibits,
Okay.
but we're not going to be asking Mr. Zachary anything about what happened to Dexter Montgomery because he doesn't know.
All right. You'll just be using it.
That's fair. I mean, I don't. Mr. Murphy, DK, took the stand and he's acknowledged that it was him and Nard. So I don't think that's really in dispute. I would add, though, and this doesn't show up in the transcript, Investigator Dennis has a habit of doing this with a lot of these gentlemen he interviews. He takes out a picture of Dexter Montgomery's head, which is actually in evidence. And he just goes into this big thing about, oh, he's got half a head. What do you think of that? And I just don't think that's appropriate.
Okay.
But if for some reason there's an issue about who was there, I do concede that Quindarius Zachary, after Investigator Dennis does the half a head thing, does show him pictures from the scene, and he says, oh, that looks like Nard, that looks like DK, or
Okay.
so I concede that he does do that.
So to the extent that this is him identifying, yeah, that's that person. I know that person. That's this person. We don't need commentary about, oh my God, look at this guy's head. You know.
Agreed, Your Honor.
Okay. Great.
Number 34 also is in agreement.
Okay.
This is in relation to something that's been suppressed,
Yeah.
rate of a house.
Told me
So
that already.
that's right, Your Honor.
Okay.
35. This is a portion where Mr. Zachary they're asking his girlfriend, Summer Good, says that basically she doesn't like him hanging out with them. And then he mentions defendant Stillwell because like Zachary gets in trouble with them. And so the state feels that, in the context of when, and the Detective Dennis is going to be also, he's testified before, but he's going to testify again. He's on the witness list and he's in this interview. This could become partially relevant in regards to this. In what's going on in Mr. Zachary's life at this time, he's trying to pull back, in his words, and kind of get a fresh start, spend more time with his girlfriend, things like that. And so this is kind of wrapped into why at this moment in time he's in jail. He's speaking with the police. And so the fact that his girlfriend, who he's kind of self-admits is very close with, interacting a lot, she doesn't like him hanging out with them. And so the state does feel like this could become relevant with the right questions of Mr. Zachary.
Okay. And it could. So I think at the point in time when y'all think it does, that's maybe something we'll just have to wait on.
Okay.
Okay.
Your Honor, the next one, number 36. So Zachary is discussing when his brother died. And what he says is he died when Haiti Gang robbed him.
Okay.
Haiti Gang is kind of a subset and affiliated with If Gang. And so the state feels like this is very relevant because Zachary's older brother, who in an earlier part of the interview, he says was one of the, Zachary says,
Founders.
correct,
Yeah.
that the fact that Haiti Gang robbed and killed his brother, that is relevant to how he kind of got involved in a gang. So it's not as much about what happened. We're not going to be asking him details of his brother's murder, but this portion could become relevant when we ask him questions about his brother. So that's why the state wants this to come in, at least in relation to, because the objection was discussion about the murder of the witness's brother. So it'd be a brief discussion of that, if at all, depending on how he answered.
Okay. Well, I mean, 159 looks to be like the details of it. So even based on what you're talking about, this part may not come in.
Yes, Your Honor. Like, we won't be asking him like what street his brother that happened on, or we would just be asking him, or we may never get to a part where we have to play this to discuss this part, but it's just about the fact that Haiti gang robbed and killed his brother.
Okay.
That's the part the state wants is relevant.
All right. All right, number 37 is on, starts at the bottom of 163.
So, Your Honor, this portion is when he's discussing the shooting of Dwayne Carter's tour bus. So Zachary, Detective Dennis personally sees Zachary when he arrives. They're at a nightclub outside. And then there's a lot of things that happen, some of which Zachary's present for, some of which he's not. And so he is not in any vehicles. It says he's in a car that did the shooting, things of that nature, but he mentions being with different members that are there, like co-conspirators, defendants, other witnesses. You know, they go different spots in the city before they arrive at the nightclub. They go to places afterwards. The events of this shooting become something that gets discussed amongst each other. And so the objection was, the investigator testified about his theory, hearsay and speculation. The state's more concerned with what Zachary, what he states happened. Like, for example, he's discussing what cars people went in, like Detective Dennis asked, did they put Thug's sisters out? Like, because some people got in different cars. And Zachary says, he's saying, I don't know where she lives, but he confirms like Max is who he calls his sister was there. And so, and Mr. Shard, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's a specific portion, but Zachary's knowledge of what happened that night will be something we'll be asking him about. And so this may be one that we have to, it really depends on the questions he asks, because it would only be impeaching him if he kind of backs off the details of that night. And so I will not be asking him about Dennis's theory of what happened, but depending on what he testifies to, certain of these portions, you may need the question asked in his response, but this is kind of very much wrapped into how he testifies, because he goes through a lot of different facts of that night.
All right, and it seems like, Mr. Shard, you're objecting to Man One, who's one of the investigators, saying, here's what I know, or here's what I saw.
I am objecting to that. I mean, my understanding is that's Investigator Dennis, and he's already testified to what he saw in the stand.
Okay. So they wouldn't be offering that to get in anything about what he actually saw. This would be if it becomes relevant if the answer becomes relevant.
This is the dilemma, Your Honor, as I see it. I concede that it seems pretty clear that Quindarius Zachary was at the compound that night. The compound, I don't know if Your Honor's familiar. I've been to the scene. It's gigantic. It's very large.
Yeah.
It's unclear to me. I know that he was not on 285. That's pretty clear. Or he's saying he wasn't on 285 or when buses were shot.
Mm-hmm.
What's unclear to me is where he was when he's claiming people were leaving out and switching cars.
Right.
He's definitely giving that information. It's unclear to me if it's based on, and this was a widely reported event. There was hip-hop gossip, internet sites almost immediately that are reporting what happened, different theories. So it's unclear to me whether he's there when he's saying people were leaving in certain cars.
Yeah.
And I concede, if he was there, if it's established that he was there and he's saying he saw things with his eyes, I mean, it is what it is for me, and I'll have to deal with that in cross-examination. But what I don't want is the state for him to say, well, I wasn't there for that part, and then the state to start impeaching him. Well, didn't you say this and this and this? And then it was just all based on speculation or internet gossip or other things. So I don't know what his source of information is for some of this stuff. And that's what I'm struggling with. I understand in a certain circumstance, he would be able to testify about what he saw. Well, in any circumstance, he'd be able to testify to what he saw. But I'm not sure he saw these things. I'm not saying he didn't. I don't know.
Well, I think we already made rulings, and by we, I guess I mean me,
Well,
about that.
you made rulings, my recollection is you made rulings about what Demekion Garlington allegedly told him about the Donovan Thomas situation. I don't.
Okay, I thought we had talked about him. Maybe we haven't, but I mean, to the extent he gets on the stand and says, yeah, I wasn't there, I don't know any of this, the state can cross-examine him about what he said before, and it may be that it's established through, not cross-examine, but examine, and then y'all can cross-examine him about whatever the inconsistencies are. Even if he says, you know what, I don't know who got into any car. I wasn't there. I was in Alaska at the time. They can cross him. I mean, they can examine him, impeach him with this.
Well, because that would be clearly inconsistent with his prior statements. But my concern is if he says, you know, as the crowd was dispersing, Investigator Dennis saw me and said my name and I ran.
Yeah. And
I ran from the scene and got into a car and left and went home. And then they're like, well, didn't you say that Shannon got into this car? And it turns out that his testimony is actually that he wasn't there for that part, and what his prior statements were based on something else.
but who knows whether it's true that
I understand.
what his testimony is, you know, whatever, next Wednesday, that he says, oh my gosh, the cops saw me and I ran and I went home and got in my bed. We don't know whether that's true or not. So he's still going to be able to impeach him. And then y'all are going to have to ask, you know, hey, you know, how are we supposed to believe that this is true? And he can say, well, you can see it on my ring camera. You know, I walked in the house, and y'all will just have to explore that. I mean, we don't have any way to know. They're telling the truth. They're supposed to swear to tell the truth and then tell the truth, but we don't know that. So I can't do what it is that you're asking me to do here. Okay.
I understand the court's ruling.
All right.
Your Honor, number 39 and number 40, they all are in relation to the same topic regarding the shooting of Dwayne Carter's tour bus.
Okay, hang on. Did that cover 38 and 37?
It definitely covered 37.
Okay, because I thought we were on 37. So
My apologies, Your Honor. So
Okay.
for 38, really 38 through 40, and we can take them one at a
Okay.
time. They all talk about the same event.
I would agree with 38 that what your ruling was just covered.
okay. All right. So moving to 39 and 40, is this also still the same incident?
I'm catching up.
Me too.
Okay, so on 39, excuse me, 30, we're on 39. He is saying that someone said we shot up the tour bus, but there's a pronoun we, and it's unclear who the declarant is or where that's coming from. He's saying that people showed up at the studio later that night, and someone said we shot up the tour bus.
Okay. Okay, so does he ever say who showed up at the studio later?
He does mention where various people come, but I don't have memory of him ever clarifying exactly. Well, I will say this. Give me 1 minute, Your Honor. I'm trying to find this part in my more detailed notes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it says after they shot up the bus, what happened? We met up at the studio. What were they saying? They're basically saying we shot up the bus. But we don't know who the we is from here, but we may know who the we is from if he somewhere else says, here are the people that showed up at the studio. And
Your Honor, there is a portion where he's discussing who switched cars.
Okay.
And Zachary, so Detective Dennis says, so Max, referring to one of Defendant Williams' sisters, and Shannon switched spots. And Zachary says, told everyone they were going to watch him, call him, meet at the studio, say we're going to go shoot up the tour bus. And Detective Dennis is like, they said this? And Zachary says, I don't know what the hell made him shoot up the tour bus anyways. Oh, my apologies. Yes. They were at the studio. Say, we're going to go shoot up the tour bus. Detective Dennis says, they said this? And Zachary says, yeah, I don't know what the hell made him shoot up the tour bus anyways. Detective Dennis, who said it? And Zachary says, Pee-wee, referring to Jimmy Winfrey, who was the individual. It was a Cobb County case, but relation to this incident. And then Shannon said it, and Detective Gaither's like, well, who was more hype about it? And he says Shannon. Now, I believe this context is before the shooting, whereas what we're talking about is afterwards, but this is kind of very much wrapped into how, when we get to this part of the interview, we'll be asking him questions about that night. And so, depending on how that questioning goes and what his answers are, he will have to have, the foundation for who he was speaking with or interacted with. And I actually say a little bit further, Your Honor, and I can actually play this if we need to. I have 3:45:49. Detective Dennis says, after they shot up the bus, what happened? Zachary says, we met up at the studio. Detective Dennis says, they came back to Metropolitan. What did they say? And Zachary says, they say they just shot up Wayne's tour bus. It was Max's truck with them in there and Pee-wee's car, referring to Mr. Winfrey. Mm-hmm. Don't know who Pee-wee was with. And Gaither's like, so both cars up there, other cars following them? And he says, probably follow them to Expressway, not sure if they followed them to the shooting. Mm-hmm. And then he just goes into a diatribe about how Mr. Winfrey came into their friend circle. So I don't see where he definitively says who it was at the studio told him. But this event happening, there's a lot of communication about it because it becomes a big incident that happened. And so I don't know definitively who at the studio told Mr. Zachary, but
I know that this is alleged to be a gang act. And I would assume part of your RICO
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And the complication is with our potential limiting instruction about, you know, well, I mean, it would only be charged against the people that it's charged against.
And it's Act 39. It's only in relation to the RICO count because this incident happened in Cobb County. So this is...
That makes it easier.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor. So...
All right. So then it is, yes.
Your ruling, only Mr. Winfrey is alleged in that overt act. He's not on trial.
Okay, but it is alleged to be an overt act in furtherance of the RICO conspiracy, right?
It is an act in relation to count one, which every defendant's charged with count one.
Right. Okay.
That's true. But also the overt acts have a statute of limitations of 5 years from the time that the indictment's returned. This is in 2015. There's a series of overt acts that Judge Glanville said, I understand your argument. We'll get to that. He just passed on it, basically, that those could not be considered by the jury in reaching a verdict. I asked for a special verdict form. So all of this, I just want to raise your attention.
Okay, now I appreciate that if that's yet another pending determination for me to make, but I would think that they can still be, I mean, nobody's being, even if it were in Fulton County, nobody's even potentially being convicted of this act, but I would think that statute of limitations or no, it can be considered by the jury in determining whether the people charged are guilty of a RICO violation. So if you've got case law that says differently, and if you already filed it, just let me know where to find it. And is that the argument that you're making, that they cannot even consider when they're considering whether anybody is guilty of a RICO violation, acts that there is a statute of limitations for and that statute has run?
So I think when you say they, my position...
They, the jury.
Okay, so the jury can only, they're going to have to find the overt act because it's a conspiracy.
Uh-huh.
That overt act must be, in my opinion, and the case law that I'll again show the court, or show this honorable court, would be within 5 years.
Okay,
But,
well, if there's case law that says that, then certainly I'll take a look at it, and it sounds like that issue is still on the table to be determined, right?
yes.
Your Honor, being a newer addition to this team, I wasn't present when this, I'm being told that this issue has been addressed before. And so if there's going to be further, I don't have the case law right now, but in terms of Act 39, the fact you can charge overt acts in furtherance of a conspiracy to happen outside of Fulton County. That part is clear.
Oh, yeah, no, he's not talking about where it happened. He's talking about statute of limitations having run.
And there is, to my knowledge, and we can, I don't have a case to cite right now, but we can, if this needs to be briefed, we will brief it. But that is not the state's understanding with...
It's not the court's understanding of it either, but I mean, been wrong before. I could be wrong right now. It is not my opinion that matters. It's what the case law says that matters. And if it has already been briefed by both sides, super, just point me to which brief and which response I should be looking at. And it very well may have been addressed before, but not decided. Ms. Lev, do you think it's already been decided?
Judge, that's what I was just saying. I
Okay.
believe that this issue was raised by Mr. Steele very early on, and I believe that it was decided in the state's favor against his position.
Okay.
But I was saying that we can check the transcript for that, because my firm belief, because I remember the argument, is that it was actually argued and decided. We will also look for an order to that effect. But I specifically remember Mr. Steele's assertion regarding a statute of limitations. I believe that it may have been Mr. Floyd that argued that.
All right.
But we'll check and see.
All right. Well, thank you. And whatever you find, send to me or point me to it at least. Now, this is not really an evidentiary ruling that's been, assuming it has been decided. This isn't really an evidentiary ruling. This is a ruling that's going to impact how I tell the jury to deliberate on issues and what kind of verdict form we need. And so it really is something that I don't find myself bound by whatever the prior ruling was, even if it was made. I want to take a look at it myself and make my own determination based on the case law. So y'all just, again, point me to what I ought to be looking at, and I'll look at that and then make a ruling.
And Your Honor, so that I'm making certain that we are speaking apples to apples, Mr. Steele's assertion is that because the statute of limitations on the overt acts have run, that the jury is not allowed to consider the overt acts?
That's what I think he's saying. No.
I'm just saying to deliberate for the actual verdict. Let's say that we're asking for a special verdict form. There's 191 overt acts in count one. Let's say the Honorable Court grants a special verdict form, and every one of any overt act within the statute of limitations, within 5 years of the return of the indictment, says not proven. But then there's one or more overt acts before 5 years of the return of the indictment that says proven. Our position would be the overt act is not satisfied because the statute of limitations bars the conviction because the overt act was previous. I'm not talking about evidence because that shows the history of the quote organization.
It could just be intrinsic or whatever. So
Right.
I mean, okay. So I mean, but I do understand they can consider it for whatever, the history and how it all fits together. But you are saying that case law bars the jury from returning a RICO conviction if the only overt acts that they find to exist are overt acts the statute for which has run.
Exactly.
All right, well.
And the state opposed at our previous argument a special verdict form. That was the Honorable John Floyd. And what Judge Glanville said was, we'll address that later.
Okay, well, we
happened.
need to address that.
We'll do it anew, obviously, because you're the court.
What? I think you just lost the battery in your...
I did. I'll put it in writing because, I think it's a fascinating issue, but we'll put it in writing.
Okay, and if it already has been put in writing, you don't have to do it again. You can just point me to, this was, motion number 50,000 filed on May 1st or whatever. If you haven't put it in writing yet, great, do that. And same for the state with regard to a response. And if there is a ruling, I want to look at that too. I mean, I don't want to reinvent the wheel either, but I will make my own determination about it.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so where were we?
Your Honor, we were on 176, line 6 is what we were just discussing.
Okay.
And just to be clear, if the foundation is laid that Mr. Zachary is falsely asserting that my client stated that, then I understand that that's just going to be a subject for cross-examination. However, if it comes from a source, allegedly comes from a source other than my client, our stance would be that would be either rank hearsay, something he read off the internet or something, or if it was said to him by someone else.
Okay.
I'm just using an example.
Sure.
Pee-wee. That would be spilling the beans. and that's,
Okay, well, and I'm rejecting your spilling the beans argument with regard to all of these things as they're going down and immediately after they go down. Now, if his source is off the internet, then that's a different story. But you have you have a basis for, I mean, they all get, whomever they get together at the studio afterwards and talk about it. So.
Yes, Your Honor. And Zachary says we met up at the studio, and then Detective Dennis says they came back to Metropolitan, and he says they say they just shot up the bus. So he's kind of responding to like a person he's around. Mm-hmm. So, but understand, and we will ask him the right foundation for that before just asking an out of the blue question of, you know, they told you they shot up Little Wayne's tour bus.
Okay.
And the next, certainly the next two, Your Honor, the state is in agreement in regarding Mr. Sharp's number 41, page 178, line 1 through 2. It's a comment that Gaither makes, so the state.
I'm going to withdraw. Can we deal with 140 first? I mean 40 first.
My apologies. I skipped over that.
40 is just him saying what he feels that there were cars following on the expressway. He wasn't there for that. And he actually says they probably followed them to the expressway, but I don't know if they followed to no shooting. Yeah. So he's just speculating there.
He's basically saying beat Snake. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, Sharon. We will not be asking about those cars on the highway.
40 is out by agreement.
41, I'm going to withdraw, and I just think it's needed to add context.
All right.
I think it would be improper in some ways, but quite honestly, it involves Mr. Steele's client and Mr. Adams' client, and Mr. Zachary says no, so I think it's needed to provide context to the no that Mr. Zachary gives.
All right, thanks.
And Your Honor, number 42, the state's in agreement of.
Okay. All right, and then 43 is our last item on this statement.
Your Honor, we're also conceding number 43.
All right.
We'll not be talking about this topic.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Zachary.
All right, then we've gotten through this statement. All right, we'll take a break in just a second. Housekeeping wise, did Ms. Love, were you able to email over to everyone last night what you have so far?
I sent some, and then I have the broader folder containing Mr. Sledge's exhibits numbered, and so I will share that. I haven't shared it because I was actually still typing in it just now, but I will share that with counsel for the defense. And Your Honor, as I look towards next week, it would be Mr. Sledge before Mr. Zachary.
Okay.
So
so we did this in the wrong order, but. All right, that means we need to get to all of what might be used with Mr. Sledge today.
That's the folder that they're about to.
All right, well.
And it's not,
not voluminous.
I don't consider it voluminous, but it's not.
Okay.
So I'm going to drop that.
All right, so go ahead and send that now, and then we've got to sort out potential jury instructions for when they come back today. We're not going to have court on Friday. Okay. So let's take a 10-minute restroom break and come back and get to work. No, and someone else is seeing